This is a shot I made from the new X-Men cartoon, but you might be surprised to learn that it's actually 3D. This is just one of 5 different shots where I wanted to see if I could repeat the iconic 90s art style using the best 3D software there is. But there's a few things that might make this difficult. I can't draw, I've not animated 2D in nearly 10 years, and I'll be using one of these, a mouse. What could possibly go wrong? One of the biggest complaints among fans is that they want true 2D, not 3D with a filter. So to make sure this looks good, I need to make sure I follow these basic steps. Match the 2D style of the cartoon, make the animation look as if it's genuinely 2D, and most importantly, showcase the best of every mutant's power. But with 5 characters to animate, hand drawing each one was a no-go, especially without a graphics tablet. So I had to come up with a plan, and in order to do that, let's take a look back at the leader of the X-Men.
To me, my X-Men.
If we look at the reference, we can split Cyclops' design into 3 distinct elements: the overall silhouette, the mid-level details, and the extra shading and line work on top. So starting with the silhouette, I used this base mesh and sculpted the body to match the proper proportions of Cyclops. Changing the camera from perspective to orthographic instantly transforms this 3D mesh into something that looks way more two-dimensional. Now that the silhouette is looking pretty good, I started to add all the extra bits like his belt, boots, straps, and of course his iconic visor. The final step was bringing it all together with some colour. To make this as accurate as I can, I'm picking colours directly from my reference, from the deep blues of his suit to the vibrant yellows of all the utilities. Now it's getting there, but if we compare it back to our reference, it's still looking pretty flat. That's because it's missing one final piece of the puzzle, the details. I tweaked the overall lighting and then went back in with grease pencil to meticulously hand paint sections of light and shadow across the whole body. I also added a thin outline as well as some line work across the different sections of the mesh, taking our final model from this to this, which looks great, except how do we animate all of these bits? Rigging can be difficult at the best of times, and not only did I need to think about skinning multiple meshes and grease pencil strokes, I also had 4 other characters to think about. So instead of rigging from scratch, this time I opted for a little helping hand by using Rigify. Luckily for me, I also found out that you can actually skin grease pencil strokes to your rig, which really helps carry those nice details we made earlier into the animation. And speaking of animation, it's time to move on to the next step. The scene I'm trying to recreate is something like the classic character intros, and looking through my reference videos, most of the actions are animated on 2s or 3s, meaning one pose is held for either 2 or 3 frames. So instead of keyframing every single movement, I only have to animate a few main poses, which makes this part a lot easier. With the character animation done, the next bit of animation has to be the iconic Optic blast effect. And what better way to achieve this than by using my old friend grease pencil. The old show takes a simpler approach to the blasts, however the updated VFX on this year's show takes it to a whole new level, and by going frame by frame on the reference, I noticed the blast is made up of 3 main parts: the main beam, the inner lines, and the glowing outer edge. The main beam was easy, just drawing it in over a few frames. I did add a little bit of noise to the edges just to make it look a little more hand-drawn. The outer beam was made on a new layer and I used a simple brush to get some nice jagged outlines. The final touches were adding the inner lines moving up and out across the whole beam to give it some real energy. All I needed to do now is to add some classic text to the background, and here we have our first character. With the pipeline nailed down, it's time to cue the music and make a start on the rest. It can't be that hard, right? The core steps were roughly the same. Block out the shape of the characters with a base mesh and add some shading, and finally the line work. I did a fair amount of texture painting on characters like Storm and Jean to really finesse their comic costumes. Moving on to animation, the simplest was Wolverine. Blocking out the main poses of his animation didn't take long, but I did add a little bit of a smear frame just as his claws pop out. After the animation was done, I went back in and drew a background scene and some VFX frame by frame until I had something like this. With 2 characters done, it turns out I'd left the hardest till last. If we take a look at the characters, you can see there's still a few things missing, one of them being the hair. All of this loose hair would be quite a challenge to animate in 3D, so in a bold attempt to pretend that I knew what I was doing, I decided to animate it all in 2D. When I blocked out the animation, I used simple shapes to map out the rough timing for the hair. I then traced the rough arc, making sure to maintain the general shape and volume of the hair. This gave me something like this. I then went back in and added more details to keep it interesting. This is a similar technique I used for both Storm's and Magneto's cloak, just with less detail. For the powers, each character had something slightly different. For Storm's lightning, I drew each bolt and then animated it moving in and out. Using this as a timing guide, I then went back in and drew the final line work using more angular shapes. The last step was adding in some smaller strokes to really make this as chaotic as possible. The last little bit of polish was adding in some rain by taking a Voronoi noise texture, scaling it and then animating it move in the Z axis. And with all of those elements combined, this was the final shot. Moving on to the last 2 and arguably the most powerful, Jean and Magneto. For their powers, I quickly modelled and animated some basic steel bars, and for Jean, a couple of props that might look familiar. I made a quick outline shader by using some geometry nodes and then added an emission shader to recreate the yellow glow that's used by the show. Jean also uses a tweaked version of this shader, except this time it has more jagged edges. I also went in frame by frame to add more of this effect, making sure that all of the shapes that I'm drawing stay consistent and have straight jagged edges. And after pouring my blood, sweat and tears into all of these animations, here are the final 5 shots. If you think I've done these characters justice, let me know in the comments, and if you like what you saw, make sure you subscribe. And to learn how you can create more animations like this, click this video here.